Well, the first time we were together was like a Bible study. They had a Bible study at Linda's house, and there's 4 of us couples, and it was, we hit it off, I mean, right away, and it was like, to me, a special time to just, like, meeting somebody that you can talk to about God. Everybody just seemed to mingle, and then we started talking about our grandkids, of course, the number one. And our kids, and I know all of their kids and grandkids now, and they know all of mine, and it's been 3 years, and we've just gradually become very, very good friends. We all have a little bit of problems that we can pray for each other with, you know, but we have a lot in common. I mean, I haven't found too many people that I had so much in common with, yes, but our biggest thing in common is our faith. And I've even met other people through the church from them. So now I know more people at the church, and it's wonderful. So I think they're my best friends. No, actually my husband and I were very leery about going, because Julie, have set us up with a small group, and we go, oh, are we going to click with these people? We don't know them. With myself, I don't entertain at my house a lot. You know, it's like I'm always nervous, and oh my gosh, am I going to have the right food? Am I going to do the right thing? And so the first time we did that, I was going, oh no, not my house, you know. But hey, it was wonderful. And I was at ease because of the people they are.
So you feel like that's changed you?
It has changed me, exactly. I'm not afraid if someone comes in and I didn't dust my table. They made me feel that way. You know, it's like, who cares? We're here to see you, not your house. You know, so yeah, that has changed me. They know so much about the Bible. I don't. And I learned so much from them right away. And to get my husband to pray with us was huge, and I think that's when we really, really started clicking, and we knew we could call each other and talk to each other if we had problems. And I don't know, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think everybody should be in a small group. You can meet more people at this wonderful church, so it's a great thing.
Isn't that awesome? I love that. I love her vulnerability and sharing, and it's awesome. And that's what we're talking about in this series. We're talking about the power of intentional relationships. Just a reminder that small group networking night is coming up. I guess that's next weekend. Check your communication piece. Don't take my word for it. But it's a great experience where you can gather around. If you feel like God has been just kind of prompting you to say, hey, this is something you need in your life to take more seriously, these relationships, it's a great opportunity. And again, it only comes up once a year, so make sure you take advantage of that. And that's all related to what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about dropping your guard. By the way, I'm Dion. I'll drop my guard and tell you who I am. I won't remain anonymous. I'm Dion. I'm one of the teaching pastors here, and I'm really excited to share this message with you today. I believe in it. I think it's so powerful and life-changing, and I just hope that you can be present and receive it. Let me pray. Father, right now, I ask you to come and to abide with us. And Lord, help us to drop our guard in this place so that we can receive what it is that you have for us. God, some teachings are just, they're easy to listen to, they're hard to apply, and some are just even hard to listen to. And Lord, I don't know what this will be, but I ask that you would be involved in my speaking and in our hearing. And Lord, I pray that by your power, that you would give us something that we need so that we might experience more of your fullness. And I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Imagine living back in the day of kings and queens, back in the days of princes and princesses, back when they ruled kingdoms and nations. And I want you to imagine that you are a crown prince of a nation. Now, it's got to be a prince. I know even if you're a woman, it's got to be a prince for reasons that you'll see later. Imagine that you are the crown prince and that you have been raised from birth to take over your father's position and to lead your nation, to become king someday. And now I want you to imagine that one day, a warrior appears on the scene. A warrior who's fighting for your nation, who is on your side, but a warrior who becomes wildly popular with people. So popular that whenever he returns from battle, people would line the streets and cheer his name and welcome him home. So popular that people begin to look at this warrior and say, you know, why shouldn't this guy be our next king? So again, imagine that you're the crown prince, and your people, your kingdom, start saying this about this warrior, this upstart who's come onto the scene. What would you do? Would you have him arrested for treason? Would you have him exiled? Would you send spies to tail him, to watch him, to make sure he wasn't up to anything nefarious? Would you send thugs over to his house to teach him a lesson? I know we like to pretend we're civilized, calm, rational people, but I know some of you have thought to do at least as much to boys who try to date your daughters, so come on now, if you're in these circumstances, what would you do? Is there any chance that if you were that crown prince, is there any chance that you would decide to befriend him, to support his bid to be king, and offer him your unending loyalty and devotion? Yeah, I didn't think so. But I want you to know that this is exactly what happened between two men in the Bible thousands of years ago. The crown prince was a man by the name of Jonathan, and he was the son of Saul, the first king of Israel. And the warrior, does anyone want to take a guess on who the warrior might be? The warrior was a man by the name of David. Now Jonathan, man, he was a promising successor to be king. He wasn't a wimp. He wasn't a joke. He was a powerful warrior himself. He was a very, very good man. He feared God. He had integrity. He would have been a fine king. The problem was that David was even greater. See, it was David who defeated Goliath, the giant. Some of you know that story. It was David who became a general in Saul's armies, pushing back the Philistines out of Israeli territory. And back in those days, the Philistines, they were brutal warriors. They were awful. They did awful stuff. I mean, you think of modern-day ISIS, that's kind of like the Philistines back then, no joke. They did gruesome things to their opponents. And so David, it was David, not Jonathan, David, who became the leader of the armies who pushed the Philistines out of Israeli land. It was David who was anointed by God in a special way to be the next king, but who was just favored by God in everything that he did. I mean, David was this simple shepherd who became this great warrior, and David was gifted with so many gifts, and yet he was so humble and likable and approachable. And you would think that would just eat away at Jonathan, watching David grow in popularity, but it didn't. Instead of becoming bitter enemies, mortal enemies, these two, in the most unlikely way, became best friends. And it is truly one of the greatest, most unlikely relationships, but one of the deepest friendships in all of the Bible. But truth be told, it makes modern day readers like us, as we read about their friendship, it makes us a little uncomfortable. Especially those of us who are men. I want to show you what I mean. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 18. It says this, it says, after David had finished talking with the king, Saul, so David's the warrior, Saul's the king, Jonathan's the crown prince, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. Some translations say this love was so deep that was actually, it says that he loved him to the depths of his soul, or he loved him as his own soul. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, dudes don't talk this way about other dudes, right? I mean, this is not the way guys talk about friends. I love you to the depths of my soul. I mean, who do you say that about, whether you're male or female? I mean, you may feel that about your family, but do you even tell your family that? And here these two guys, they have this love that is deeper than the love of themselves, to the depths of their soul. A few verses later, it says this again, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Wow, what is that? Makes you a little uncomfortable, doesn't it? A bunch of chapters later, this actually happens after Jonathan tragically dies in battle, and David receives news about it. and he is totally broken up about it. He's in mourning, he's in grief for his friend, and so he does what we all do when we lose a good friend. He writes a poem. Right? I mean, who does this stuff, right? But David, he writes a poem because he's a poet, he's a songwriter, and he writes these words. I want to show you a part of the poem that he wrote on the occasion of Jonathan's death. He says, "How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women." Now, come on. Some of you right now are thinking, there's something that's just not right about this relationship. There must be something inappropriate. There's something funny about all this. For two men to be carrying on this way about each other. And yet today I'd say, you know what? What if there's nothing funny? What if there's nothing inappropriate about this relationship? What if this relationship is truly, sincerely a deep friendship? What if this relationship is exactly right and yet so rare? And what if this kind of relationship is the exact kind of relationship that God has created each and every one of us in this room to have? Not just with our spouses if we're married, but with one or two other people in our lives. See, even though this may be culturally uncomfortable for us, for two people to express their love and friendship like this, the truth is that this best friend idea is all over our culture. It's embedded in our culture. I mean, just turn on a sitcom and, you know, modern day sitcoms about families, there's kind of the dysfunctional marriage and the dysfunctional kids, but there's always the best friend figure, isn't there? I mean, there's always that person who's hanging around all day long. It's a fixture. Just think back to when you were a kid. Some of you are kids already, and you don't have to think back that far. Good for you. But in the longing of the heart of every kid, in the heart of every kid, there's this longing for a best friend. And some of you will remember who those best friends were and just how incredible that was to experience those kinds of friendships. I mean, I think of guys like David Bowe and Jeff Boholsky and my cousin Cameron and Jamar, who was my foster brother for a time. I think about those guys, and those relationships are so special to me to know that they were my best friends. You remember that. And even if you didn't have those kinds of relationships, you remember longing for those kinds of relationships, right? But then what happens? We become adults, and few of us have that. If you ask a grown man who his best friends are, he'll probably name some people that he went to high school with or college with, maybe people he hasn't talked to in years. And that's what this idea of best friend becomes to us. Women aren't a whole lot better. For women, it may be a mother or a sister, and that's okay, but women tend to keep it into family. And it's like as we grow, we get too busy for this stuff or too sophisticated for all this best friend stuff. Maybe we get too cynical. It seems childish, or maybe we're too wounded from pain, or in our past we've been burned by relationships or something. I don't know. But here's the thing. Even though all that may be true, I believe deep down we all still long for it. I want to show you something. I want to show you words from Brené Brown. She's a PhD. She's a researcher. She's a writer. I think you should read her books. I think they're powerful and they're insightful, and I've learned a lot from them. I think you could too. But I want you to look at how she defines connection here in just a second. And don't look at it now, okay? As she defines connection here, I want you to look at it, and I want you to tell me, is there any part of you that says, nah, I don't need that? I don't want that. Or as you read these words with me, is there just something in your soul that cries out and goes, yes, that's what I was made for? So I want to read these words to you. You can look along. But she says, I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. Now, honestly, as you hear those words, as you hear that kind of connection, is there any part of you that goes, no, I don't need that, I'm good, I'm fine? See, yet the reality is, for most of us, that we've got a lot of shallow relationships. We've got people in our lives with whom we can pass the time, people who are a lot of fun, people we can party with, people who we can laugh with. But my guess is for most of us, we don't feel like we've got those people who fill us at a deep soul level. The way that David and Jonathan filled each other up, I think most of us don't have that, and yet we were created for it. We long for it because it's how God designed us to live. And today, I want to use this template of David and Jonathan's relationship, and we can't dive into it too deep because it's really interwoven into the scriptures, but man, go ahead and study it this week as you go home. It's a powerful narrative. But today I want to just use kind of the template of their relationship as I've studied it to share with you some components that you can put into practice in your relationships to get those connections that are deeper, that are so much more valuable than anything that you might know here today. And the first one is this. The first component I want to share with you today is admiration. Admiration. Now, all relationships begin with admiration. You like the way someone looks, or you like someone's ability. You admire their ability to make sales or to play basketball or whatever it is, or you admire their character, how they treat people or how they treat you, their kindness, their generosity. Every relationship begins with admiration. And the same is true with David and Jonathan. Take a look. We've looked at this once already, but I want to show you this verse. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. So after what? What happened right before this? Well, right before this is when David killed the giant Goliath. Goliath, the big warrior, the Philistine warrior who was talking trash to all of Israel's armies. Goliath, the guy that no fighting man wanted to fight. And here's David, the shepherd boy, not particularly trained in the military, who takes 5 stones and a slingshot, and he says, this man is speaking blasphemy against the Lord's armies and against the Lord, and how can you stand for that? Someone's got to do something, I'll do something. And so David goes and he kills Goliath. And Jonathan, this warrior, living safely in the palace, he watches this. And his heart is filled with admiration at the boldness, the courage of David. See, all relationships begin with admiration. The reason I'm beginning here with admiration is just a simple reminder for all of us that these kinds of deep, life-changing friendships, they will never start out of pity, out of guilt, out of obligation. I mean, to be sure, you will see people in your life who just need a friend, and you will pity them, or you will feel some sense of duty or obligation to befriend them, and that's good. That's what we call living the 6 around here. That's another part of our 1-1-15-6. You can serve them by being a friend to them for a period of time, but these deep life connections that will just change your world, they don't happen because of pity or guilt or obligation. They happen on the basis of mutual admiration, mutual respect. And I know that sounds obvious, but I think sometimes we as Christians, we forget this. And if you're a Christian, you know how this works. Or if you're someone who's interested in Christianity, you know how it seems. Like if you're a Christian, you gotta be best friends with everyone. And that's not true. The reality is that some of these relationships are reserved for just different kinds of connections. And to build one of these connections, man, admiration has to be there. So for David and Jonathan, it wasn't just courage. They were both leaders, and they admired each other as leaders. They were men of integrity. They were men of deep, deep faith. And their faith played a huge role in their relationship. So for you, as you think about people whom you admire, hopefully it's the things that are deeper in life. It's not just, man, I really admire your ability to crush beer cans on your forehead. That's awesome. It's not it. I mean, you may admire that, but that's not the grounds for a great life-changing relationship. Hopefully it's the stuff that you admire that is just deep, that is core to who you are. So admiration is where it starts. The next component is exclusivity. So admiration, exclusivity. Exclusivity is big for me. It was big for David and Jonathan as well. Take a look at this. So again, we'll see some of these verses over again. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David. Exclusivity right there. I'll talk more about that in a second. And he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him The king was like, hey, David, you're useful to me. You're staying in my court. You're not going home. But verse 3, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. So Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Is anyone wondering now, like, why is Jonathan taking off all of his clothes? Awkward, right? Well, that's because this is a covenant ritual. What's a covenant? A covenant is a relationship promise, a relationship agreement that two people might make, or that God makes with men or men make with God. It's this relationship promise. And what Jonathan is doing here is he's saying, David, you will be to me like no other. And so I'm giving you the things that are most sacred to me. I'm giving you the shirt off my back. I'm giving you the sword from my side. I mean, these are two warriors talking to each other, but David, he's a shepherd. He doesn't have a sword. Hardly anyone had swords in those days. And so he's like, David, I'm giving you my sword. I'm giving you my bow because I believe in you. I trust in you. All of my chips are riding on you. I am devoted to you, David, like I will be devoted to no other. This is a great covenant, this pledge of exclusivity, and it's so, so powerful. Now, by definition, you can't be exclusive with all of your friends. Do you get this? I mean, you can't be exclusive with, as Andy mentioned a few weeks, the 672 Facebook friends or whatever you have. Like, that's not exclusivity. You can't go around and tell every person in the world that they are your favorite person, right? Unless you're a grandparent. You can do that with your grandkids. You're my favorite, but just don't tell your other, brothers and sisters. Come on, you know how grandparents are. You guys got this in spades. You figured out how that whole thing works. And yet exclusivity, by nature, it's limited, it's small, it's one or two people in your life. And again, as kids, we understood this, we got this, Boys would prick their finger and they become blood brothers. It was this pledge that, hey, of all of our friends, this connection is deeper. And I'm not sure what little girls did. I think little girls approach friendship the same way God approached the creation of the world. They just speak it into being. They say, let's be friends. And it was, that's how girls do it. Much simpler. See, the only place that we still do these covenants is in marriage. So a couple will stand in front of an altar, in front of a congregation, and they'll say, I will take you to heaven to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, forsaking all others. It's a pledge of exclusivity. And yet here's what's crazy. In the Bible, marriage wasn't the only place where people would covenant. As I told you before, people would do it all the time in relationships. Now, we've kept the covenant of marriage for man and wife to live together forever. But we've totally abandoned this idea of covenanting with a friend. And I believe that that's to our loss. That there is a place in relationships where you know someone well enough, you've spent enough time with someone, where you finally pledge to them a deeper kind of friendship. Just saying, you know what, we may have lots of other friends, and my life will be filled with lots of other people, but you will be to me like no other. I think that's powerful. I think that's needed. They did it in Bible times. I think it's okay for us to do. And the reason I believe it's so important is because without that pledge of exclusivity, without covenanting with another person in your life, you can never do the next thing. You can never have the next component, which is really the crux of what we're talking about this week. So the third component, we've had admiration, we've had exclusivity. The third component is vulnerability. And to be vulnerable means this. Here's a dictionary definition of being vulnerable. It means that you open yourself to being easily hurt or harmed physically, mentally, or emotionally. That you open yourself to attack, harm, or damage. Now, you can think about how this played out in David and Jonathan's relationship, right? I mean, remember, Jonathan takes his sword, he takes his weapons, and he gives them to David. Weapons that David could have come back and used to kill him with. That's vulnerability. But more than that, what you may or may not know about David and Jonathan is although Jonathan wasn't jealous of David, although Jonathan loved David, Saul the king, Jonathan's father, he hated David. He was filled with jealousy and rage. He spent the rest of his life trying to kill David. So think about what Jonathan's doing as he makes this covenant, this pledge of exclusivity with David. He's essentially saying, I pledge my allegiance to you even over my father. And remember, King Saul is nuts. This guy is crazy. He'll get mad at you and throw a spear at you in no time. He does it all the time. And so Jonathan's putting his own life at risk by associating himself with David. This is vulnerability. And David, on the other hand, now begins to trust Jonathan, the son of the king who wants to kill him. And Jonathan gives him advice and counsel, and David listens to it every time, even though it could have been a trap. Again, this is vulnerability. This is opening yourself up to being hurt or harmed, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, to being damaged. Vulnerability. And here's what I'll say to all of us in this room, that until we can get comfortable, and it's hard to do because it sounds antithetical, until we can get comfortable with dropping our guard in some of our relationships, not all of our relationships, but in those relationships where there's admiration and exclusivity, until we can get comfortable dropping our guard in those relationships, we will never be seen, heard, valued, loved for the people that we really are. We can be seen and heard and loved for the presented self that we parade out in front of people, that highly polished, highly make-upped false self. But until we can learn to drop our guard, we will never be valued and loved and esteemed for our actual self, until we can get comfortable with being our true self, which by being our true self means that you're opening yourself up to harm. And that's what makes it scary. See, I think the great misunderstanding about vulnerability is this idea that vulnerability is weakness, or that it's only for the weak. Man, you're crazy if you think that. You have to be so strong to be willing to make yourself weak like this. Vulnerability is not for the faint of heart, because the risk of harm is just too great. I mean, who of us in this room haven't been harmed in some way by being vulnerable? I mean, who of us in this room haven't been rejected by someone that we opened our real self up to, and they saw something, they must have seen something that they didn't like, because once they saw the real us, they took a step back. I mean, who of us haven't felt that rejection in life? And who of us haven't been gossiped about by someone whom we trusted? And who of us haven't been betrayed by someone that we confided in with some really confidential information? Gosh, I remember back in third grade, I had to have an exploratory procedure, which I now know, I have a new word for this. It was a colonoscopy. I didn't know what it was at the time. This is vulnerability, folks, okay? They were concerned about some stuff, and so I was going to have this colonoscopy. And my parents, who knew the ways of the world, they kind of told me, they said, hey, you don't need to tell your classmates why you're missing school. Just kind of tell them that you're missing school, and just keep it personal. They don't need to know that stuff. They don't need to know what it is. And so, me being a very obedient third grade kid, I went to school and I told my best friend exactly what the procedure was and where they were going to put the camera. And I got back to school after the procedure, after taking a day or two off, and all the kids in my class knew about it, right? And they're like, they put a camera where? And I'm like, and I still remember that, right? Because those little betrayals, they stay with you, and there's this great tendency we have just to curl up in a ball and say, I will never share anything again. I will never make myself open to hurt. I will never be vulnerable again. And yet by missing vulnerability, by being, just unwilling to take that risk, you miss the reward. See, like so many things in life, the riskiest things are the most rewarding. Do you know that's true? The riskiest things are often the most rewarding things, and you cannot have the reward of the connection that we saw Brené Brown talk about, this deep soul connection that fills you up and sustains your spirit. You cannot have that until you're willing to risk being hurt, until you're willing to risk opening yourself up to another person. And again, this is why I just believe that our life journey with God is so important, because when you know who you are in God's sight, and when you know what Jesus has done for you, and you know how treasured you are by God, the God of the universe, when you are firm in that, then that makes you willing to risk in relationships. So we've got First, we had admiration, and then we had, remember, exclusivity, and then we had vulnerability, and here's the fourth component, permanence. Permanence. When you've got a relationship that has all of those other elements, it is a relationship that will last. It can become one of those relationships that is truly a death us do part kind of relationship, where you pledge yourselves to being friends, not just while you live in the same town, not just until someone better comes along, not just while you can get along and, when the first big fight happens, I'm through. But then you can have a friendship that truly lasts forever. In the Old Testament, one of my favorite stories is a story that happens long after Jonathan and Saul are dead, and David is now the king. And David begins thinking about his best friend, Jonathan, and everything that Jonathan meant to him. And he's just having a moment of grieving, and if you've lost someone special to you, you know what that's like. It can happen years later, and you just get overwhelmed. And as he's thinking about Jonathan, he sends out a servant and he says, I want you to go out, I want you to find to see, is there any living relative of my friend Jonathan? Someone whom I can just love for Jonathan's sake. And so the servant goes out and he discovers there is one living son of Jonathan, a man by the name of Mephibosheth. Here's a name for you if you're pregnant, a good name for your son, Mephibosheth. And he finds this man Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth, part of the reason I think he's still alive is because he was in this accident when he was young, and he's crippled in both feet, and he can't walk, and he can't work, and so he's destitute. And the servant comes back and says, I found someone, but it's just this guy, and he's a cripple, and he's kind of destitute, no one very important, this guy Mephibosheth. And David goes, bring him to me. And he brings Mephibosheth into the presence of David. And then David looks at this man, the son of his best friend, and he says, here's what I'm going to do for you. Because of the love I had for your father, I'm going to take all those lands that belonged to your grandfather, King Saul, and squatters have taken those over, and other people are living there now. I'm reclaiming those lands with my armies, and I'm going to give them back to you. And oh, by the way, I realize that you aren't able to work those lands, but I'm going to send servants out, and they will work those lands on your behalf. And they'll take the crop and they'll do with it whatever you want. If you want to sell it for income, it's up to you, but it's yours. And oh yeah, because of this friendship that I had with your father, I now invite you to move to Jerusalem. You can become a resident in my palace, and for the rest of your life, you are welcomed, you and your family, to eat at my table. In other words, David is saying, because of this relationship I had with your father, you will now be a son to me. Basically adopts this full-grown man. And gosh, I love that story because it just shows you the power of a relationship like this, a relationship based on mutual respect or admiration, based on exclusivity, where there's true vulnerability. It lasts. It transcends even death. There's no end to it. Now, as you're sitting here hearing me talk about this and you're thinking about this friendship, is there anyone sitting here today who doesn't want that kind of connection? Is there anyone here today who would go, that sounds good, but I would rather choose a life of drinking buddies and girls' nights out rather than that? That's where I want to live my life. And yet the reality is lots of us do make that choice. Because this whole thing weirds us out, and there's so much risk, and it sounds uncomfortable, and we're afraid of what other people will think. And if that's you today, just let me challenge you for a minute to say that even if this weirds you out, and even if you can't imagine yourself writing a poem about another man in your life or another woman in your life, even if this weirds you out, let me just challenge you for a second to say, don't write it off. Please don't write this off. Because if you do, you'll be missing out on one of the greatest treasures that God has created for you to have. See, the question for us today is, can you drop your guard? Can you drop your guard long enough to begin to experience a relationship like this? See, I promise you, just from experience, I promise you that it's hard work and it is frightening and it's intimidating and it doesn't always end well, but it is so worth it because when you find a friend like this, like we see between David and Jonathan, it will absolutely enrich your life in a way that you never thought possible. Now really quickly, before we go, I just want to show you this. So we've talked about admiration, exclusivity, vulnerability, and permanence. And now, before we go, I just want you to look at this from one more angle. See, do you realize that these things are the very things that you can also have, not just with other people, but do you realize these are the very things that Jesus, the Son of God, offers you in a relationship with himself? And do you realize that when we talk about being in a relationship with God, these are the very components that we're talking about. Admiring God, worshiping him, admiring his character. Exclusivity, saying you are God and there will be no other in my life like you. Vulnerability, that means going to God with our weakness and being okay with that. Going in our sin and confessing to him and being as we really are, not our pretend selves. And it is truly a relationship of permanence. Do you realize that? Do you realize where all this starts? Look at this quote from Brene Brown. I want to read it for you again. And as I read it for you again, it's a quote I read at the beginning. I want you to think not about human connections now, but I want you to think about your life journey. I want you to think about your connection with God, okay? So I'm going to read these words again. Think about you and God now, not you and someone else. She says, I define connection as the energy that exists between people. In this case, it's you and God now. When you feel seen, heard, and valued. When they can give and receive without any judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. Now see, I wonder, when you come into a place like this on a Sunday morning, I wonder, what is it that you come for? Do you come here because you know this is a place where you can be seen and heard and valued? Do you know that this is a place where you can give and you can receive without any judgment because Jesus, he paid the penalty for all of your sins. All that judgment stuff is gone. God is not here to judge you, that he just wants to give to you and he wants to receive from you in this great mutuality of friendship without any judgment. See, I wonder, when you come into a place like this, do you come seeking sustenance and strength? Or when you come to a place like this, do you come because it's what your parents did and your grandparents did and it's some sort of religious obligation for you, some moral duty, or you're trying to be a better person? See, that's honorable if that's your motive, but you are missing something so much greater. And as much as I want every person in this room to be able to drop your guard in human relationships so you can experience the closeness and the intimacy of a friendship that is epic and lifelong and transcending even death, even more than that though, I want you to be able to drop your guard with God. To find in him this friendship that he's created you for. To find in him one who will look at you and he will see you and he will listen to you and he will value you and he will pour out blessings on you and he'll receive your acts of love back to him even though they're paltry in comparison, and he will do that without ever judging you. Where he will give you sustenance and strength for your soul, for your life, for your journey. Gosh, I want that so badly for every person in this room, because there's truly nothing like it. And here's the thing, when you begin to find that in God, when you can drop your guard with him, and you can begin to receive the benefits of a relationship with him, then it just does something to you so that you can live a little riskier with other people. And the fullness just multiplies as God brings those people like Jonathan, like David into your life to build you up. So I want you to all stand right now. And I'm going to invite you to sing this song. It's a song of worship. It's a song of friendship with God. It's a great prayer. It's a song of declaration. And as we sing this song, Just use it as your time to just invite God into your life in a new, deeper way. Because when you experience this kind of depth with God, when you drop your guard with God, it'll change every one of your relationships. We sing.